Greetings, fellow painters! Today we're going to compare using a white acrylic wash versus using a white oil wash while painting up an identical glowing green smoke effect on two separate models. Both acrylic washes and oil washes are easy to use and yield great results, but each medium has its own pros and cons. We'll explore the properties of both mediums to see if they're a good fit for our painting style. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. Looking at the game art for this character, we can see that the smoke here is highlighted in such a way that the recesses and lower areas appear darker, while the more voluminous and upward-facing areas have brighter highlights. I feel that this is how standard opaque objects would be affected by normal ambient light, and it looks fantastic in the art here. But I want the smoke to appear mystical, like it's glowing from within. Therefore, the recesses, which I imagine would be closer to the source of the glowing mystical effect, will get painted brighter, and I want it to appear denser and darker as the smoke billows away from that light source. There are two reasons that I've decided to go this route. First, I like trying something new with each model that I paint, and I haven't used light-colored washes for a glowing effect before. Second, I don't want the smoke on the base to be so bright that it overwhelms the viewer and detracts from the character model. Adding brightness only to the recessed areas of the smoke will add some interest to the base without it being the focal point of the entire piece. That's the theory anyway. I'm starting with the miniature primed in black because of how I intend to paint the rest of the model, and I'm using the color green by Monument Hobbies to base coat all of the smoke. For this smoke effect, the color primer you choose doesn't really matter as long as you get a good opaque base coat with your initial color. In fact, white primer would probably work best if you're just doing the smoke effect. The initial base color for our smoke will be the midtone color, or basically the color that we want our smoke to read. This approach will work regardless of the color smoke you want. For example, if you want red smoke, you could use something like Pyrrole Red by Monument Hobbies, and if you wanted gray smoke, you could start with a paint like Uniform Gray by the Army Painter. I'm pretty much just slathering this paint on with a number 5 brush, going for maximum opacity. This green has fantastic coverage even over black primer, so I'm able to achieve complete coverage in just 2 coats. The first wash that I'm working with is the oil wash. There really isn't much to making an oil wash. I'm using some old Bob Ross titanium white oil paint that I've had for almost 30 years now. I mixed that with some odorless mineral spirits in a 10 milliliter glass vial that I got from Amazon. I don't really measure anything when I'm making oil washes. I use a sculpting spatula to put some oil paint into the glass vial, and I use a pipette to add the mineral spirits. I want the consistency to be somewhere between a pin wash and a sludge wash, so I'm mixing at a ratio of about 6 to 7 parts mineral spirits to every 1 part oil paint, so it's going to be pretty runny. I put the cap on the glass vial and shake it until it's well mixed. I want the wash to flow easily into the recesses, but I also want it to leave some residue on all areas of the smoke. This is so I can physically remove the white wash on the raised areas and have the smoke appear to fade to a darker green as it moves away from the recesses. You'll notice as I'm applying this that some of the areas I'm covering already have white paint in the recesses. This is because this is my second go at it. I had chosen a crappy synthetic brush to apply the oil wash, not realizing that it was a brush that I had used for Halloween face painting a couple years back. So it was tainted with some eyeshadow color or something that was giving the white oil wash a pink hue. I was able to easily remove the contaminated oil wash with some mineral spirits and a makeup sponge. This is definitely a testament to how easy and forgiving it is to work with oil washes. Once I have the smoke completely covered with the oil wash, I get to work removing it. One advantage of oil washes is that there really is no rush to begin the removal process. Even if I let this dry overnight, I can reactivate the oil paint with some mineral spirits and remove it without damaging the acrylic paint underneath. Here, I start with a dry makeup sponge and remove the bulk of the oil paint. Because the sponge is dry, a slight film of the white paint will remain over the entire area. We're also not going to remove any of the white paint from the recesses. I switched to a smaller makeup sponge, like an eyeshadow thingy, for the harder to reach areas. I'm not applying much force to remove the oil paint, and the removal process isn't having any negative effects on the green acrylic paint. Once I have the bulk of the oil wash removed, I use the same small makeup sponge dipped in some mineral spirits to continue the removal process. I'm not trying to remove all the white film. I'm just removing the white oil paint from the most raised parts of the smoke. The mineral spirits will remove all traces of the paint, leaving only the pure green acrylic paint showing. So now we'll have a transition from a deep, pure white oil in the recesses to a white film as it moves away from the recesses to a pure green at the outermost bits of smoke. And that completes the oil wash application. One downside of an oil wash is that it has to dry for a while before continuing with your painting process. I'll let this dry overnight before continuing. It's a good idea to apply your oil wash at the end of a painting session when you don't plan to do any more painting on the miniature that day. Oil washes work well for painters who have multiple painting projects going at once, so you don't have any unnecessary downtime while you wait for the oil wash to dry. So for the acrylic wash, I'm using Airbrush Flow Improver and an acrylic titanium white ink by Liquitex. I'm using approximately 2 drops of Flow Improver for every 1 drop of ink. You can see how the Flow Improver breaks the surface tension of the ink as the ink just flows throughout the Flow Improver when added without any mixing. Of course, I still mix it just to be sure to get a smooth mixture. I start out here showing how easily this wash flows into the recesses, benefiting from capillary action much like an oil pin wash would. Now this isn't quite as magical as an oil pin wash, but it's a great alternative if you're averse to using oils and mineral spirits. After the short demonstration, I get to work applying the acrylic wash all over the smoke feature. The difference here is that I have to work much faster than I did with the oil wash. In fact, I'm working so fast that I'm not paying any attention at all to the camera focus, so I actually end up with very little usable footage here. I work in stages, applying the wash to a small area, then immediately removing it with a makeup sponge and a little water. This makes the process a little more stressful than working with oil washes, a little less zen. Also, I'm an impatient painter, and as such, I only let the green paint dry for about 10 minutes before applying the wash. You should definitely wait longer than this, as the water-laden makeup sponge is also impacting the green acrylic base coat. Now I need to go back over the smoke in some areas with green paint to repair the damage that I did when I was removing the acrylic wash. This wasn't an issue with the oil wash, since removing the oil was a gentler process. However, this also highlights one of the main benefits of acrylic washes, which is that you can continue painting with the acrylic paints immediately. No waiting a day or more for the oil to dry to continue with the project. As a side note, another option for an acrylic wash would be use a product like Noosh by Monument Hobbies. This product is intended to be mixed with standard acrylic paints and used for reductive techniques much in the same way as an oil sludge wash. It would have a much longer working time than what I'm using here. It's also more expensive than Flow Improver. I'd use Noosh as a replacement for an oil sludge wash, but if you're looking to make an acrylic pin wash, I'd stick with the Flow Improver and an ink. I use Black Green by Monument Hobbies to darken the parts of the smoke that are the most dense. As I'm doing this, you can see that I messed around with a yellow ink in some places, but I really didn't care for it. Remember, I want the smoke to be an accent piece and not detract from the character. I often choose to test things right on the model that I'm working on, and then I'll pivot to something else when necessary. This is a good example of that. On Zombie Mysterio, I decided to go with a more subtle transition between the greens, and I use Flat Green by Vallejo for the outermost parts of the smoke. It only takes roughly 2 minutes for this step for each of the miniatures. I decided to go with Fluorescent Green ink by Daler Rowney for the glowing parts of the smoke, and I'm not mixing in the fluorescent yellow shown. I actually decided to use it as a wash to cover all of the smoke and unify it. On Zombie Mysterio here, I experiment with using an airbrush to apply the ink to the underside of the smoke, and I really like how it came out. I then switched to a standard brush to apply it as a wash, and I compared the results. I think that the end results are similar, so use whichever method you're more comfortable with. The airbrush is not noticeably faster, since when using the standard brush, we're just quickly covering everything as a wash. I would say that maybe if you want an OSL effect from your smoke, you should paint it last and use an airbrush to get that effect. I completed the same process for the standard Mysterio figure. I just covered all of the smoke using the fluorescent green ink as a wash. On both models, I went back in with the acrylic pin wash to intensify some of the bright areas before giving them one final glaze of the fluorescent green ink. If you're deciding between going with an oil wash or an acrylic wash, I'd say that it really depends on the type of painter that you are. If you enjoy working on just one model at a time, then an acrylic wash would probably be the best choice, since you wouldn't have potential days of forced downtime waiting for an oil wash to dry. However, if you're a painter who likes working on several models at once and don't mind setting a project aside while you work on something else, then I think oil washes have enough benefits over acrylics to make them a better choice. And here's a look at the mystical smoke on the finished miniature, which we will get to painting in our next video. Please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for watching.